Nisa Bula, kia orana, hello geta, aloha, good day, kaya wanya, and kia ora. Te mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou. I'm Julie Haggie, Chief Executive of Transparency International New Zealand. Greetings to you. We're honoured by your attendance at our webinar today. Greetings to experts from across the Great Pacific Ocean. It's another beautiful winter's day in Wellington, te rā hotoke, and I'm going to start now. We've got people coming in, but I'll open with a karakia. Mauri a oho, mauri tū, mauri ora ki a tātou, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. It means life force awaken, life force stand tall, life force all wellness, good health for all. Join together, unite. It is my honour to greet you today to the third of our second set of webinars that we're running to encourage information sharing and courageous discussion with Pacific people, including in Aotearoa. Our aim is to improve understanding and transparency around some gnarly issues. I encourage you to visit our YouTube site where we've got links posted as well. We'll post a link to that in the chat. Over these series of webinars, authoritative speakers have shared their insights and examples of practical application of Indigenous governance in the Pacific. It's really excellent learning, and I encourage you to visit that YouTube site. Prior to that, our first set of webinars focused on corruption around financial systems and the impact of transnational organised crime on Pacific people. Reducing corruption is what Transparency International and the global movement are all about. This set, running from now through to the end of August, is looking at environmental governance. When natural resources are allocated without transparent and fair involvement of Indigenous people, women and local communities, then trust in public systems is completely eroded. Corrupt political, public sector, criminal and private practices are often the foundation for natural resource exploitation and damage. Across the Pacific, communities are confronting corruption, displacement, climate injustice, and the marginalisation of traditional governance. They are guardians of Te Moana and the whenua, working at the flax roots and the power systems of action, policy and culture. And at this point, obviously, I want to call out the Pacific Island students fighting climate change with their landmark opinion that they received after putting pressure on the International Court of Justice and advocating so strongly for their action, which they've now got. We'll put a link to that in the chat. It's really worth reading. Ngā mihi to Rochelle Stewart-Allen, who curates this series of webinars and has done all the hard work, and to Zenaida of For Purpose, who's managing our tech. And we can only do these forums with funding. Thank you to Transparency International, with funding provided by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Trade and the Department of Foreign Affairs of Trade in Australia. I'll hand over to Fenton shortly, but just some housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on your YouTube site. Please mute your microphones and cameras are muted. Also, bearing in mind, we have variable internet connections. We hope it will hold, but that's just the way it is. We work with what we've got. This is an information sharing event, so we assume a range of understanding of the topic. If there's anything you don't understand, please ask a question in the chat or make a comment. So ask questions of our speakers. There are no dumb questions. We want to have kōrero that is useful. We're also very happy to field questions after the event. Finally, our values are integrity, courage, transparency, respect, and non-partisanship, and we bring those values to this hui today. We respect different opinions. We can all learn from each other. Anyway, that's enough talk from me. I'm now going to hand over to Fenton. For those who haven't had the pleasure of meeting him, Fenton Lutunatabua is a Pacific climate advocate, a storyteller, and a facilitator with a background in community organising and environmental justice. He has led regional campaigns amplifying Pacific voices on climate resilience and governance, and he is known for creating inclusive spaces for dialogue, reflection, and collective action across the region. Bula vanaka, Fenton, over to you.
Vanak Vakalevu, Julie. Hi, everyone. I'm Fenton Lutunatabua, and today is webinar 3 of 4 of TIN's incredible webinar series. Today's webinar is titled From the Pacific Shores to the Bay of Bengal, Building Resilience Through Governance. Not only will we get to hear from powerful voices from the Pacific region, we'll also get to hear important perspectives from South Asia, exploring how inclusive governance, local knowledge, and community action are protecting vulnerable coastlines and, in essence, shaping climate resilience. It is a privilege to be here today, so thank you for showing up. The opportunity to hear about grounded experience of climate leadership, storytelling, and transparency is far and few between. I'm grateful to hear speakers from the Solomon Islands, from the Marshall Islands, and from Bangladesh share stories about what is possible when communities lead the way and provide the blueprint of the way forward. Before I introduce our panelists, in the chat, could you please let us know when you're joining us from and what climate action means to you? As the chat is being populated, I'd like to introduce the first of three of our panelists. First up is Gareth Quity. Gareth is a Pacific climate justice advocate with over a decade of experience in climate policy, disaster risk reduction, and grassroots mobilization. Most recently, serving as a climate justice lead at Oxfam in the Pacific, Gareth has led national and regional initiatives focused on community resilience, stakeholder engagement, and environmental governance in the Solomon Islands. Gareth continues to champion locally led climate solutions and inclusive governance across the region. Gareth, it's really good to see you again. I'm so glad you're here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Fenton, for that introduction. I would like to say thank you as well to Transparency International New Zealand for giving me this opportunity to be able to share, some of my work in climate change space or my decade of experience. So, today I'll be talking on, climate justice in climate change adaptation initiative. It is an interest that it grew in me, over the years working in this, climate change space. Next slide. Yes, so for the overview, we often heard about, climate resilience, climate change adaptation, climate justice. So when you hear climate justice in climate change adaptation initiative, what does that mean to you or to me or, mean to us? Well, as a Pacific Islander, I could reflect growing up in the beautiful islands, bountiful resources from the land and the sea. Weather and climate was not a problem back then. Even, my forefathers were, local scientists. They could even predict weather and relate it to interconnectedness of life and the environment. Sadly, it was never the same story today. To be told to my sons and daughters and grandchildren, they will never understand it. And forever it will be a folktale to them. Next slide. So why climate justice is an issue, is a justice issue. Climate change is a justice issue. There are problems of climate. The problems of climate crisis today is not ours to be blamed, but we are the ones, especially the Pacific Islands, who are on the forefront of the brunt of climate crisis. Well, not everyone is equally responsible as well for causing climate change, and not everyone is equally affected by its impacts. Like I've said, it's a clear example here in the Pacific. Like we are the ones that contributed less to impacts of climate change, but we are very much at the forefront. And historically, most greenhouse gases that are emitted that causes increase in greenhouse gases are once emitted from industrialized nations. And developing countries and marginalized communities like ours, we often suffer the most. So with climate justice, it demands those with greater responsibility and resources to help those who are in a greater vulnerable situations, like us in the Pacific. Next slide. So how do we ensure climate justice in climate change adaptation initiatives? Well, I have a few points to share. So first is to ensure equity in adaptation efforts. Like I said, not everyone, not all of us are equally the same. So we need to ensure equity in adaptation efforts, especially in the climate resilience work that we are doing in the communities. Adaptation plans that we develop with the communities must be inclusive and must be accessible. Oftentimes we work with the communities, we do assessment, we develop, community action plans, but they are often, been taken back to the communities for them to use. So it's good that we, when we develop those adaptation plans, they must be inclusive in those plannings, and those plans must be accessible. Also, without justice, adaptation efforts can resource existing inequalities and leave behind the poor and the vulnerable groups. The other one is fair access to resources, fair distribution of financial resources and technical support from funding mechanisms is very important. We have a lot of, fundings like GCF and other, global fundings. So we must ensure, fair distribution of these resources. Sometimes, climate change adaptation initiatives are often implemented in communities where it is accessible. However, remote places too also has impacts to climate change issues that our communities have experienced. And so for me, over my course working in communities, I often found that in terms of donor funding, sometimes when you want to work with the communities, donors, they come with already predetermined communities as beneficiaries. So sometimes, we often see very vulnerable communities often left out and not part of these, climate change adaptation initiatives. And so it is important that, we have fair resources to those most vulnerable and affected by climate change. Empowerment and participation is another one that I see it's very important. Communities, they have the right to participate. And like I said in my said earlier on, when we go into communities, we want to do, climate adaptation work or, climate change policies or whatever. We must ensure, communities participate in those policy dialogues or in those community assessments or plannings. They have the right to that. And we must ensure that, local knowledge, people in the communities, they have that local knowledge and values that, kind of safeguard or, bring their resilience over the years. So it's important to, really work with them and ensure we empower and have them participate in those spaces. And it's good to have, their priorities being reflected in the adaptation strategies as well, and not just in the policies. We sometimes often, when we do consultation on policies, we reach out to communities. But then when it comes to strategies, their priorities are often left out. So it's good that we need to ensure not just policies, but adaptation strategies reflect priorities of the communities. And protection of human rights. I think we've had a lot in the region, talking about, climate justice and human rights. We have had some, very positive news lately in the region in terms of ICJO. And it's very fulfilling to see, people able to speak, yeah. So for me, having people's rights protected is very important. We have, see humans have basic rights to food, water, shelter, health, security, and others. So it's good that we ensure the people in the community have access to those, basic rights. Next slide. Yep. So to conclude my presentation, it's good going forward. We need to recognize and address, power imbalances, that exist within our society or within our systems. This is something that we need to ensure it's recognized and addressed. But we need to ensure we prioritize the vulnerable communities and ensure accountability. We empower them so that they're able to address or become resilient to climate change impacts, and ensure there is equity, participation, and human rights are considered in the climate change adaptation work that we want to do in our communities to build the resilience of the people in the communities. So once again, everyone, thank you very much. I'll stop here, and yeah, thank you, Fenton. Over to you.
Gareth, thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for that, Gareth. That was like super grounded in community. So I appreciate that. Also, I wanted to mention that your reminder about unequal responsibility and unequal impacts is timely. Your mention of inclusive and accessible adaptation planning and honoring feedback loops with community is necessary. And overall, what you shared will 10 million% support all of us navigating this in ways that align with our dignity. So thank you for that. Our next panelist for today is Jetnil Kijiner. Kathy is a Marshallese poet, climate envoy, and founder of Jo-Jikum, a youth organization for environmental action. Kathy rose to global prominence after performing her poem Dear Matafele Panem at the UN Climate Summit in 2014. Kathy uses storytelling to advocate for climate justice and Pacific resilience. Her work powerfully blends art, activism, and cultural identity to amplify the voices of frontline communities. Kathy, so great to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Fent. I've known Fent since the beginning of my climate journey, to be honest. Fenton, I met him first on, a Zoom call where he helped prepare me for my presentation, actually, at the front lines. And at the same time, he was working with my cousin Milang, who were shoring up to use canoes to do a massive blockade I think it was in Australia. So Fenton has definitely informed and guided a lot of my path. So I'm really grateful to be here with him today. So yeah, as Fenton has stated, that's a lot of my background has been through a lot of different avenues of engaging with climate change. Right now, I'm working primarily as climate envoy for the Marshall Islands Ministry of Environment. And so a lot of what our work looks like is developing adaptation policy. So a lot of what Gareth said in his presentation really resonated with me and is actually a lot of what I try to do on the ground and support our national government on the ground on as well. The Marshall Islands is different from other islands because we're an atoll nation. That means that we are our islands are shaped quite different. They're basically coral islands that grew from the rim of undersea volcanoes over thousands of years. So, you know, a lot of the islands look like a circle or a lei encircling the lagoon. And so it's what that means is that we're completely flat. There are no mountains and no higher ground to go to. And we're about 2 meters above sea level. So that makes Marshall Islands uniquely vulnerable in the Pacific. You know, when we say the Pacific is drowning, a lot of people like to use that kind of imagery to describe the drowning islands of the Pacific. It's key to remember that not all the islands aren't drowning at the same time. And so there's a really unique vulnerability to Marshall Islands in the sense that we are looking at a crisis where we don't have higher ground to move to or to go to. And so a lot of our climate advocacy right now is focused on adaptation, rightly so. It used to be completely focused on mitigation. We used to go around the international realm telling everybody to stay the line, keep warming temperatures to 1.5, mitigate renewable energy, fossil fuel transition, moving away from fossil fuels. But a couple years back, a scientist came to the Marshall Islands and basically told us that the world's not moving fast enough. We have to start protecting ourselves now because, you know, we don't have time. So a lot of what adaptation looks like for us is very extreme. We're looking at raising islands, covering our islands in using seawalls to protect the coastal areas of our islands because all of us basically live on the coastlines. So there's no such thing as a coastal city in the Marshall Islands. We are a coastal nation in essence. So we have to build seawalls to protect our homes and our infrastructure from waves that crash into our islands, from high tides, from those kinds of impacts primarily. So beyond seawalls, we're looking at, as I said, raising islands, and that does mean raising land so that it can be higher above the sea level, extending land out into the lagoon through dredging processes. We've also looked at relocation of our capital city from where it is now because it's one of the more vulnerable islands in our country. So the thing to keep in mind is that there are 24 islands in the Marshall Islands. So we're looking at a wide expanse of area and multiple different islands to protect. And each island has its own identity and its own ecosystem. And so each one requires its own kind of protection. So we're also not just looking at these extreme types of adaptation, raising land, extending land out into the lagoon, relocating people in community. In country, that's what I meant. Relocating in country, not to be confused with mass relocation outside of our country. So we're looking at those options, but we're also looking at, adapting according to the differences between the islands. So there's the more rural islands versus the semi-rural and semi-urban islands. And then there's the two main urban atolls, which are really crowded and they have their own infrastructure issues, but they're also the center of our governments. So that's some of what we have to think about when we're planning around adaptation. Other things that we have to look at is things like cultural protection. If a lot of our identity and our culture is rooted in land, what happens to that culture and identity when you change that landscape? So that's another question that we're having to come to terms with. An example for that is that all Marshallese people own land. So if you were to extend land out into the lagoon, who owns that new property? So we have 1,000-year-old tenure, land tenure system. It's a very old land tenure system that was created by our ancestors, but then shaped by different colonial legacies over the many different years. Essentially, though, all land belongs to Marshallese people, and Marshallese people can all trace their lineage to specific parcels of land. So how would our land tenure have to shift to adapt to these adaptations that we're being forced to make? So some of that is like some of the questions that we have to have, some of the discussions we have to have with high chiefs, with our community members, and it really would be up to our high chiefs, because we still use a traditional chiefly system to determine how will our land tenure system, our traditional land tenure system, change due to climate adaptation. So these are some of the issues that we incorporate into our national document, the National Adaptation Plan, which we published in 2023. And that was many, many years in the making. And it's completely comprehensive. When you look at climate adaptation, even though I've made it quite simple and explained the big parts of climate adaptation, which is this hard adaptation solutions that are extreme, you also have to think about how it's cross-sectoral. It impacts across every sector. And so how will each of those sectors be impacted? The tuna fishery stocks, the schools that may be used for evacuation centers, the educational curriculum that needs to be developed so that students understand what kinds of changes we're making to their home. Things like that. So I think that where we're at now after publicizing the National Adaptation Plan is really trying to engage more of our community members to understand what this policy is and what does it mean for our country. One thing about our National Adaptation Plan that we're very proud of is that we incorporated a lot of our community into it. So we went to 17 of the 24 islands to talk to them all about how climate change is impacting their communities now on the ground. And what we saw was that across every island that they went to, every community said that the most severe impact of climate change is sea level rise, that they're witnessing it themselves. They're citing ball fields that, they used to play at that's underwater, airport runways that are now underwater. Even, funeral ritual sites, places where they used to bury family members now being underwater or having to shift their funeral rites because the water tide is coming in faster than it used to. And then, of course, also islets that were once lush and had trees and was a source of food being just a sandbar. So these are all, evidences that we collect and we incorporated into the National Adaptation Plan. But I think for me as a Marshallese person and incorporated into the process and, speaking more at the international level than anything else on climate change, it was affirming for me to see that our community members are observing the same thing that all these other scientists have been saying for so long, which is that sea level rise is happening. It's not just us coming out there and telling people. Now we can say, this is what our community members are seeing on the ground too. And it's across multiple different islands. And I think that that's really important to emphasize. The second thing to emphasize is also that when you ask them, what are the different adaptation solutions you'd like to see? They all want seawalls. They all want to protect their islands. The option that is the least preferred is migration. No one wants to actually leave their islands to respond to the climate crisis. People want to stay in their homes. So that's another thing that's really important that we want to make sure comes across when we talk to our donors, our partners, anybody who's working in climate change, because a lot of times the feedback we get is it's cheaper for you to just leave. Why can't you just leave if it's less costly? And we're able to point to this and say, our people are conclusively saying they want to be able to stay in their own islands. So in this sense, adaptation becomes a way to protect our sovereignty, a way to protect our livelihoods and our culture. This concept that feels very dry and very scientific is actually a means for protecting who we are as a people. And it's really important to make that connection and to make that clear to people so that they know that When we are advocating for mitigation and adaptation, it's because we want to be able to protect ourselves now. So that's a lot of what the kinds of work that we do. But besides that, we also tried our best to incorporate youth into the process. And so Fenton mentioned that I co-founded a youth nonprofit called Jo-Jikum. That means your place or your home in the Marshallese language, and it basically represents how we want Marshallese youth to fight for their homes and their islands. So we were really fortunate that we were able to incorporate Jo-Jikum into the process of developing the National Adaptation Plan. So we had actual Marshallese youth going into these islands and then working with other youth, using arts as a tool to get them to engage in this issue and to kind of share their thoughts and their feelings about what kinds of changes they'd like to see. And I think that some of the changes they like to see weren't just about climate change. It was also about things that, were bothering them, about corruption, about the Compact Treaty, which is a treaty the Marshall Islands has with the United States. The youth were paying attention to what's happening around them, and they really care about how it all intersects. So I think that's also an important part to reference as well. So for me, I've always, when I co-founded Jo-Jikum with my cousins, I continued to run it long after many of them, moved on to other fields. And because I was running it, I was able to sort of incorporate things that I believe in and am passionate about into the work with youth. And one of them was arts. So as Fenton said, I did perform a poem at the United Nations Climate Summit in 2013, I think. No, wait, no, 2014. I can't believe I forgot the year. Fenton's laughing at me. That's the year of my daughter's birth. Wow. Okay. Anyways, so so I was able to perform the poem at the Climate Summit in 2014. And what that taught me was that poetry and arts has a place to play in the climate movement, and it's an important role to play. I think that, when we're communicating such large and sometimes grandiose issues that can be really difficult for people to connect to if you're not really feeling it firsthand, the arts can allow us to sort of bridge that gap between our experiences to one another. I think for me also, it's an important tool for highlighting the gray areas of climate activism and climate work, which can get really complicated as well, especially if you're a Pacific Islander or Marshallese person, a young woman, a woman of color, or anything like that, like a minority representative, basically, in the climate field. So using poetry was how I tried to understand the world around me and how I tried to engage on the climate change issues. So it helped me sort of process the emotions and the feelings that can be connected to coming from an atoll nation that people are saying will disappear one day. So I see poetry and arts as a very important tool to understanding climate change and climate crisis. And because of my long-standing engagement with climate change, the poetry has changed. At one point, I've always said, I don't want to just be a climate poet and that's it. But climate change is such a vast issue, and there's so many angles and so many ways to look at it, that as I grew and kept understanding more and more about climate change, the poetry and the shape of the poems changed also. So for me, it's become almost like an anthology or like a memoir of my experience as working in climate change. So I have seen firsthand how it helped me to face climate change as an issue. So what I've tried to do is incorporate it into our work with youth. So one concrete way that we've been doing that is by running a climate arts camp, which we've run consecutively now. Well, not consecutively, because I think we took last year off, but I think this may be our 5th or 6th climate change arts camp this year that they're actually just completing it this week, in fact, in the Marshall Islands. The team is running it. And it's a really great, summer camp that we run with high school students. We teach them all about the basics of climate change. And then they turn that, knowledge that they learn about in the morning. In the afternoon, they go into art classes and they turn that into art. So they learn it. They use the arts of painting, poetry, songwriting, and traditional Marshallese weaving. And at the end of it, we create a community showcase and they're able to share their work with their families. So, it tackles some, really basic issues in the Marshalls, which is climate education. It's also, as a parent, you want your kid to be engaged in the summer, and there's not many summer programs, to be honest, in the Marshalls. So this is one of the few. And then also it incorporates the arts and the sciences, really comprehensively. So that's a really clear way in which, we've brought them into the national youth, into the national policy. They led and actually created their own presentations with other youth, and they engage with other youth. They also are working with, and then we're using arts to turn emotions into it. Because I think the other thing to keep in mind too is with climate change, a lot of times it can be really scary to face it. You feel disconnected from it as an issue. But the meditative power of art, requiring you to sit, think about it, and create something from those feelings, it allows you to face the issue head on. Because I think from what I've experienced with a lot of, even elders and young people, adults, is that a lot of times fear makes people shut out the issue or, disconnect ultimately. And art allows us to focus in on it. So yeah, I think that is a part of that. I don't know if I've talked for 10 minutes, if I should go into the poem. I was gonna read you guys a poem to close. Have I talked for 10 minutes? Yeah, Fenton?
I think you're good with the time, Kathy. You can,
I can go into the poem?
yeah, for sure.
Okay. Okay, so should demonstrate a little bit of that work. I've been doing a lot of poetry. So I have a collection of poems called Jetnil. That's my only collection of poems so far. Jetnil poems from a Marshallese daughter. And it has poetry about climate change in there. But I also am known for a lot of poem videos. So if you ever want to look up poem videos like Rise from One Island to Another, that one is about the rising the melting ice in Greenland, where I collaborated with a Greenlandic poet, Aka Niviana, and also learn about our nuclear legacy. So I didn't mention that, but our mind is also at a unique, juncture where we experienced over like we experienced over 60 nuclear weapons after World War II. And so we have this really interesting intersection of where the nuclear legacy informs our climate path as well, our engagement with climate change. And it's very much interlaced with one another. And I can say more about that maybe later. But just to close that, I've been writing poems for a little while now, and this is a newer poem that I wrote, and it's about Jo-Jikum, actually. It's kind of a poem that I wrote dedicated to Jo-Jikum, the organization I co-founded with my cousins on Marshallese youth. It incorporates my time teaching at the College of the Marshall Islands, because I also used to teach. It incorporates the impacts of climate change and sea level rise on our freshwater lens, which is sort of like a source of fresh water in the Marshall Islands that looks like a contact lens, and it's gotten a lot more saltier and impacted because of the sea level rise. And then it incorporates traditional Marshallese legends. But ultimately, it's really a reflection, my hope for the younger generation to take on climate change. And I think that it's especially timely given the recent incredible success of the ICJ, which was led by Pacific Islander youth. So I always like to say that, with climate change, I used to say climate change is very much a movement that is, what's the word? When you run really long. what's what's the word, Fenton, when you're marathon. I used to say climate change is a marathon, so it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I changed that now. It's not a marathon, it is a relay race that you need to be able to pass the baton. So the same way that the nuclear legacy is something the Marshall Islands has fought for so many years, climate change is also something that we're in it for the long haul, and we need young people now more than ever. So was the poem that's sort of a reflection on that. Okay. It's called Wudilomer. I dreamt of a dead shark. At a family party, my mother tells me to check the oven, and there it is. Gray leathered skin, jaw open like a metal trap. A dead shark. I wake up and meet my mother in the hallway. I tell her about my dream. Together, we step outside and find our world flooded. Water in our yard, the street, our neighbors wandering outside, mourning days on their faces, homes inundated, families evacuated, sent to sleep on classroom floors at the elementary school. My family are descendants of Ribego, the shark clan known to control waves with roro. They turned the tides with their voice, sang songs to sharks encircling their canoe. I used to teach Pacific literature. We read stories our ancestors told around coconut husk fire. What are the legends we tell ourselves today? What songs are we throwing into the fire? What are we burning? Will future generations recite these stories by heart, hand over chest? Maybe in one legend it will start with water. Water from the sea that flooded our homes, our land, and now our underground reservoir, our freshwater lens nestled deep. On Kwajalein, there was said to be a magic Wudilomar at the south that grew from the reef itself. Its white petals fell into the water and blossomed into flying fish. On a lazy Sunday, my cousin Tamara and I lay side by side on my auntie Kaka's veranda, sun drying our skin. Together, we dreamed of a place for young people like us who leapt joyful into water, willing themselves wings to fly, who dared to dream of a world where islands stay rooted. I still nightmare of dead leather sharks. But I'd rather dream. I'd rather imagine our next generation, their voices turning the tides, how our freshwater lens will drink in their chants, how they will speak shark songs and fluent fish, how they will leap, petal soft, beautiful, unafraid, into the water before blossoming to fly. Thank you.
It's going to take a second to take that in. Kamal, Kathy, thank you for sharing your gifts with us by your poetry and reminding us about the uniqueness of the vulnerabilities, as well as the strengths of the Marshall Islands and other low-lying atoll islands. So much in what you shared really resonated. I think the principles of adapting according to context, the pieces around cultural protection, climate force displacement, non-economic loss and damage, shifting land tenures to meet adaptation measures, and remarkably, the cross-sectoral approach to all of this reflected in the national adaptation plans of the Marshall Islands, I believe truly are a blueprint of things to come for islands across the Pacific. So thank you for leading the way and being incredibly responsive to the times. Our final speaker for today is Mahfouz Haq. Mahfouz is a leading voice on climate finance, environmental governance, and policy integrity in Bangladesh. With over a decade of Transparency International Bangladesh, Mahfouz has led national and regional research on climate governance, risk mapping, and accountability frameworks. Mahfouz brings deep experiences from both government and civil society in advancing transparency and sustainable development. Mahfouz, I know it is especially early for you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Hi, thank you, Fenton and TI New Zealand, for giving me this opportunity to share our experience, particularly the heading of this webinar is very interesting. This is a story actually, the Pacific shore to Bay of Bengal. And know that Bangladesh is one of the forefront of climate change. And when people were actually started talking about climate change, but we have been experiencing the disaster, which is actually the reality of Bangladesh. You know, the location of Bangladesh is very in a placed in a very vulnerable location. You know, the Bangladesh is located in the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta. It ranks the 9th in the world risk index, because all the waters actually coming from the Ganges and Brahmaputra Delta is actually flowing to Bay of Bengal. I had a picture here actually, image here, which is saying that the blue lines are actually the water lines actually. And you know that seals that come to the sea is actually the global amount of seals that come to the sea is almost 80%, which actually runs through the Ganges Brahmaputra Delta. So if there was no deep sea part in the Bay of Bengal, another 3 large Bangladesh would have been developed by this time. So Bangladesh is actually a very vulnerable country to climate change, and you cannot gauge it. The sea level rise is not possible to gauge actually, but we have been actually seeing the increased cyclone and flooding in Bangladesh for last 40, 50 years actually. For an example, only Bangladesh has experienced 47 cyclones in last 15 years. You can imagine the extent of vulnerability we have. And when the cyclone comes, it comes with a storm surge, it comes with river flooding, it comes with salt water intrusion, water logging, and salinity. And there are people in coastal areas, almost 44.8 million people living in the coastal areas in Bangladesh, with more than 18 cities that are highly populated. And everyone has their story to tell actually, what climate change actually impacts there, how it impacts there. And there are hundreds and thousands of stories and poems and literatures on people's life actually, how they have relocated. There are experience of people, those who have actually relocated for 6th time, 7th time, 8th time, and completely displaced from their own homelands actually. And they came to the migrated to the cities, major cities in Bangladesh, like Dhaka and Chittagong and other parts. So it's a very densely populated country. You maybe know that 173.6 million people, we live in a very small places. And the deltaic form actually, it breaks and it builds actually. It breaks in one side and it builds on other side actually. The rivers play. So what happens when climate change impacts? It impacts trade and businesses, livelihoods, infrastructure, and ecology. And the annual annual financial loss from the flood and cyclone is 2.2 billion and 3 billion respectively, which actually deprived Bangladesh more than 1% GDP per year actually. So it's a huge thing for Bangladesh. So considering this vulnerability, actually Bangladesh adopted number of policy measures actually and implemented the policies. So they signed the Paris Agreement, they adopted the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan. Bangladesh government actually produced the Delta Plan 2020-21. So it's a huge thing. They tried to incorporate everything in their policy and practices so that they can cope with climate change. And at the same time, Bangladesh actually tried to because the climate finance and the money that needed for Bangladesh was not sufficient. Bangladesh developed its own fund from its revenue funds, which is Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund. Bangladesh also created other funds. I'm not going to tell all of these, and it implemented more than 1,000 projects. Which are mostly on the water resources, disaster, social safety and security issues, agriculture, fisheries, urban areas, ecosystems, policy and institutional development related, and capacity development related activities. So government has tried to mainstream all these and implement the policies. The other thing is that the finance that is coming from international sources, just because that climate change is a global issue and Bangladesh is liable for only 0.3% of greenhouse gases. So Bangladesh expect that global community will support Bangladesh in its fight for the climate change. But what actually happened, we needed 2 billion per year for adaptation only. Again, is that we received only 1 billion in last 15 years. So which is a very small amount of finance. So what is the story about how Bangladesh is actually implementing the project? It's a very I would tell that it's a sad story that we are the most vulnerable country. At the same time, we have been implementing number of projects, but the poor governance is a reality for Bangladesh. And many of the projects actually went to diverted to private accounts, vanity projects, and leading to misuse about almost 35% of the climate finance in Bangladesh. And it happened through policy capture, political consideration in the project selection and approval for areas where vulnerability is less, but the concentration of the project is very high. Actually, you see the map here. The big dots doesn't represent the dark and most vulnerable areas. Actually, it represents that many of the projects went to the less vulnerable area, which are actually considered on a political ground, and the finance received by the non-existing NGOs. In some cases, the finance is used unethically, rent-seeking, faulty and low-quality work, damage of project infrastructure, non-disclosure of information. All these are the dynamics that happened in climate finance in Bangladesh over the last 15 years, 50 to 20 years actually. So what Transparency International Bangladesh actually tried to do is to follow the money actually. That was the initiative that TI Bangladesh actually followed. And we found that, for example, I'm trying to tell a story. You can see the picture of a cyclone shelter, which is very important for when the cyclone hit, people try to take shelter in the cyclone shelter. When incoming flood occurs, then people try to go to the cyclone shelter. They are actually school come cyclone shelter. But what happens when the abuse of power is there actually? Built to be used as a school come cyclone shelter, but its rooms stand empty. No listen take place. It happened because ignoring the needs of the vulnerable community. The government engineer responsible for building this cyclone shelter actually located it near to his house for his own benefit actually, just to show the community that he is very powerful. But there was no school actually, and it actually outraged the local community. They became very angry. And particularly the cyclone shelter was very important for the fisheries communities. Those are living in the island, like small island-like places. And they cannot reach to this cyclone shelter because that is not actually a school come cyclone shelter. It was not functional. So this whole finance is actually misused. You see, people are trying to tell that we protested, wrote to the authority, raised demands, but nothing happened actually. So how actually climate finance diverts to the use of the local people for the powerful people. And the other part, what Bangladesh actually tried to do is to conduct national level studies on climate finance, track the climate finance, And while tracking this climate finance, we tried to use the social accountability tools. One part was research and another part was trying to integrate local community in this process. So we tried to apply the social accountability tools, engaging the youth. You know, TI Bangladesh has a very big volunteer basis. We have 6,000 volunteers. Those are mostly university students and local school, college and university students. There are CSOs also. We have the initiative of, we have 45 offices around Bangladesh, which we call the committees of concerned citizen. Those are actually formed by local people from the local community. They are respected local people. So we engaged them in tracking this climate finance, like follow this money, how the projects are implemented in the local level. And they track the money, they question the project implementing authority, what is happening, how much money is actually coming for a project, and who are the beneficiaries of the project. So they started questioning the authority that the money is coming for them and they should be involved in this implementation process. So we tried to engage them in this following process. We also engaged them in empowering them through organizing public hearing. We tried to bring the implementing authority and the recipient of the beneficiary of the climate projects together. And you can see the picture here. A public hearing is ongoing. Local people are actually questioning the local authority, project implementing authority, about the projects that is being implemented in their area. So this is another way how we try to empower local people to ask the power that you should serve what is actually designed for them. We also try to use the youth and their power, particularly for applying RTI, Right to Information Act, so that local people know what is happening there. We also operated satellite AI desk, advice and information desk in the local implementation areas, so that people can get information from there. And the ES, which we call the Youth Engagement Support, consisting of volunteers from the local universities and schools, they actually facilitated the satellite desk related activities. We also observed days like human chains, rallies, campaigns, and then everything involving the youth, CSOs, and students and marginalized community. So other things are actually we try to do at local level, cartoon competition, journalist award. You see one of the photo from the cartoon competition is that how climate finance has been actually disappeared at the local level. You see how money is actually dripping down to the local community. So this is the reality, and we try to engage local people, youth, and journalists. Particularly journalists are very much, they are the protagonists in fighting climate change in Bangladesh. We try to empower them with new knowledge on climate finance through receiving that is from our research. And they try to unveil number of irregularity cases, and that they published in the newspapers, the leading newspapers of the country. And it helped to actually bring a accountability framework in our country, in Bangladesh, in climate areas. So apart from that, we also tried to engage South Asian countries in climate finance for building their capacities. Like we organized, build scale-up programs, how we to give them the sharing their experience, how youth are engaged in climate finance, how research on climate finance can be done, how the social accountability tools can be actually employed for accountability. So at the same time, we tried to orient the youth that what should their stake in, what would be their stake in the next step of the climate finance. We also engaged the very young generation that is coming forward through the cartoon competition. You see, the cartoon is a very important element to messaging local what is happening in reality. So all this happened, And everything we try to do is to empower the local community, journalists, youths, and the protagonists that are actually very important for fighting the climate change, and build the capacity for generating a new new landscape in Bangladesh on climate finance. So this is what we have been doing, and we believe that government is also sensitized from other side. So they took number of initiatives. They tried to follow the same procedure, they tried to integrate the accountability framework so that we can track the climate finance in budget system, in SDGs, in implementing the climate finance in other activities. They have created the budget code so that we can follow the money from the national level to local level as well, so that we can install the accounting system as well in the national accounting system. So now the climate change regime can actually be identified, that how much money actually we have been receiving from the national sources, from the revenue sources, and also from the international sources. And there is an auditing system also installed because of our involvement in the climate finance. Government has actually contacted with its monitoring and evaluation division so that they can actually follow the money, and they can also try to bring an accountability system. We have also incorporated the Anti-Corruption Commission in climate finance as well. We have been trying to build their capacity so that they can follow the money and they can report it to, and they take measures against the misuse of the climate finance. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you everyone.
Mahfouz, thank you so much. That was really insightful. I really appreciate learning about the important places you call home, and sharing with us insights of the incredible work of TI Bangladesh, specifically the strategy around following the money and really focusing in on climate finance. There was lots and lots in there, and it's been great to get a sense of this incredible work. I also personally really just want to shout out the community engagement pathways for folks with the mobilizations, the setting up of the youth engagement support, and the work with journalists, but specifically the really, really cool cartoon competitions. It's so beautiful to see. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now that we've heard from each of our panelists, we have about 10 to 15 minutes for a panel talanoa. As always, I have a couple questions for our panelists, and we'd love to hear from each of you. I know folks have been populating the chat with their questions and comments as well. That's well received. Thank you very much. Gareth, I'm hoping to come to you first. Would you be able to tell us more about the work that you do in communities, and specifically tell us about the challenges you faced in making environmental governance more inclusive?
Thank you. Fenton, can you hear me? Okay. Yes. So thank you for that question. Yes. So, in my decade of work in the climate change space, and especially working with the communities, our work was really, addressing issues of community infrastructures, small community infrastructures, like, for example, water tanks. Some of these remote places in the Solomon Islands don't have access to, fresh water, or, yeah. So, how can we ensure we help them? So we went to those communities. So we build them, a full package of water tank to, just use, rainwater to harvest those, for, people to be able to use clean waters. At some places, we do build kind of small water supply systems, gravity feed, where we're able to, get those into the communities. But again, there are challenges as well, to getting that associated with cost and other things like that. We do build some evacuation centers as well. Sometimes, climate change cannot tie with, disasters as well. I think that has been discussed by some of my colleagues here. So we will also ensure we have a place when, disasters happen, people can go to those places and be safe. Yeah. And I think part of that was, we want to ensure we are ensuring we develop, and provide awareness to the communities. So that is very much part and parcel of the work that we do. Community awareness. We also develop, community action plans for communities. We know it's really hard to access funding or, financial resources. So how can we ensure we help the communities kind of build community action plans where we identify, risk, issues related to climate and, kind of build on those to ensure we have kind of proposals to help the communities to access fundings. So that was around, the work that I do. But then in 2018, I went, kind of different space, kind of more on, the climate justice space and, working mostly with the partners. So in 2018, I established the Solomon Island Climate Action Network. So it's a network that, in a coalition of, different, especially civil society organizations and small NGOs that, want to address issues of climate change, so I established that network and, today that network has become a recognized network nationally. It's able to collaborate with the government in, policies and stuff like that. So it's great to see that, having those coalitions or networks, because when we talk about justice, you need to work with, or align yourself with, like-minded people to ensure we work on issues of climate justice. So it's good to see this, network doing, advocacy work, also building the capacities of themselves. It's good to see, them building their own, members or their own partners to ensure they can withstand issues of climate change that are coming, or, building the capacity for them to be able to apply for small grants to be able to, support them with the community resilience. So these are some of the things that they do, and it's good that this network too, they're able to, bring in, the government, the civil society together. They're all sitting up together in those, tables, able to, discuss. And it's really good to see those, work going to the communities. And now it's started to, we started to see the fruits of those work, the communities, the networks, now collaborating with government. And it's good to see now that government has given the space for this network to be able to be part of the delegations to COPs. So this is, for me, it's an achievement itself, seeing the work that has been done in the communities. Yeah. And I think, challenges for that is, resources, Fenton, having the resources, I think that is a very, I think all would agree with that. We always, have challenges with financial resources, so we can't really help everybody to implement, climate adaptation initiatives. But, those that, the lucky ones, they were able to do that. But I think for me, we need not to just stay and wait for, fundings to come, but we need to start somewhere small to address those issues of climate change. Thank you, Fenton.
Thanks so much, Gareth. Excuse me. I'm actually really glad you mentioned CCAN the Solomon Islands Climate Action Network, and I really look forward to their leadership at the upcoming Forum Leaders meeting in September. Gareth, as you were speaking, that relay analogy that Kathy shared earlier really resonated with me. So it was good to hear about all of the work that you did with CCAN to set it up for success. Kathy, I'm going to come to you now. You obviously work both in policy and poetry, two very separate pieces of work that require you to lean into being either very cerebral or very heart forward. Personally, I believe both are important and one isn't necessarily better than the other. And your work has proven to me time and time again and shown me that its true value is how it translates each other's necessity to people, right? I would love to hear from you about could you describe for us the ways that local culture and values shape resilient environmental governance?
Yeah, thank you, Fenton. I think one really clear-cut example is that when we go out into the different island communities to engage with them and collect their perspectives for the National Adaptation Plan, a part of the work that we created policy documents for how to conduct those outreach on the adaptation plan. And a part of those policy documents highlighted the importance of cultural protocol when we went into those communities. So, an example of that is that in Marshallese culture, when you're going into a new island, you're as a visitor, you always have to bring manpe, like which is the Marshallese term for like the front of your hand. And the idea is that you always have to bring gifts for the community that you're going to be living with, because you understand that, you know, they already have very limited resources, especially in the more rural neighboring atolls. And so, you know, when you come there, they're going to be going out of their way to host you the entire time you're there. That means they're going to be collecting and cultivating food so that you have food every day. Different groups are going to be the ones contributing food. Every single household will contribute food so that you have food while you're there. And so that's a really key part of our finances too, is when we're developing funding and applying funding for funding to do these outreach in these communities, we always include that manpe, and it's always understood that that's a requirement, that we can't just show up to these communities and with empty-handed collect data and then leave. The idea is that you also have to be gifting and bringing some type of contribution in some way. So that's what we would normally do. And that the contributions can look like a lot of different things. But a lot of times it has to do with like just ordinary goods, coffee, flour, rice, because our culture eats a lot of rice. You know, canned goods, because a lot of times people are still eating canned goods as a part of the diet, drinks, and then sometimes it might also be like, you know, gifts for the kids, volleyballs, sporting goods, art supplies, books, those kinds of things. So I think that that's a real clear example of how our culture is still incorporated into national policy. And then also the way in which we engage with the community is also conducted through cultural protocol. So we don't just go in to this island without without telling them ahead. We have to get approval from the senator, from the mayor, from the landowners and the high chief before we even think about planning on going there. When we get there, we have to have a meeting with the landowners or the high chiefs. You know, in some cases first. You always have a larger community meeting, and then a lot of times we recognize, and this is where gender kind of comes in, is that a lot of women weren't speaking up in those meetings. So we also have to split up, and there has to be separate groups where men will have their own group, where they, you know, a lot of times the men will conduct an outreach with the fishermen, and then women will have their own group of engagement, and then the youth will have their own group. Because we see that a lot of time and time again, people aren't engaging in the same way. So that's also meeting people where they're at, rather than expecting them to engage in a way that you would prefer. So I think that that's also a way in which we do that. So I think that's a kind of a quick example right there. Let me know if you want me to go into further examples. Thanks.
No, that was beautiful, Kathy. And also just super beautiful to see the values of reciprocity in action at this level of work. And also just a super cheeky note from myself. Uh, like note to everyone that is thinking of working in the Pacific region, please have a customary sensitivity and traditional protocol budget line in your budget as you do this work. That'll serve you in the long run. And then finally, Mahfouz, if question for you, if you could change one thing about how decisions are made in climate governance, what would it be and why?
You. If it is engaging the local people, this is their need, and climate finance, whatever the amount is allocated for them, should be actually based on their need, based on their priority, and based on their resilience, actually. So it's important that local people and their voice is heard actually by the policymakers. Until unless there is a framework how local people can bring the national and global accountability, until unless that is actually developed, no talk in climate conference, no webinars in social media or any other forms would not work actually, because it's their money, it's their rights, and it's their survivability. And I believe that engaging the local people and vulnerable people and listening to them is very important. So this is my take actually. Thanks.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Mahfouz. It is almost time to wrap. And so to close, I do want to just invite the panelists to offer one or two sentences as a closing reflection of our time together. If we could go Gareth, then Kathy, then Mahfouz.
Thanks, Fenton. So I think for me, my reflection would be, is to always ensure the justice component in the work that we are doing in terms of climate change. So like I've shared in my presentation, when you talk about climate adaptation, you talk about resilience, or you talk about mitigation, but ensure you must ensure that climate justice in all these issues that you're taking through in terms of climate change. Thank you.
Absolutely. Kathy?
I think Gareth really captured it well. I think it's good to take a moment to celebrate the ICJ. There's so many really negative news around the world right now in regards to climate change. So, I think seeing the real potential of the ICJ ruling and how this will impact all of our work, I think that's going to be really fascinating to watch. Yeah.
Thank you. If I could say one quick thing about the work of the Pacific Island students fighting climate change and all of that work around the ICJ is like, it really felt like the Pacific and the climate movement in general needed that win. And we're just so excited about the many possible avenues that it's opened up for us. And the way that the PIFCC students led this work was they made it feel like it was everybody's victory, right? Everybody's win. And that was just so beautiful to see. Mahfouz?
So I would wrap that climate justice is very important. It should and accountability as well. When there is a justice, there is accountability. Actually, beforehand the justice, there should be accountability, and it's not only the local level accountability or national level accountability. It's the global accountability. You see, when we place so much money and deliver a very little bit of that to the vulnerable people, it doesn't mean actually there is accountability. I believe that every one of us at the global stages, we should actually speak up to tell the policymakers, global policymakers, that it's not time for only for the discussion, but it's time for action actually. So it's time that developed countries also deliver the climate finance that they have promised actually. So it's important because unless there is finance, there is no action. So it's important that there is a global accountability framework as well. Once we try to accountable our government, we also need to hold accountable the global policy. For example, the developed countries, those who are responsible for the climate change, anthropogenic climate change. I will not tell it climate change, it's anthropogenic climate change. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gareth, Kathy, and Mahfouz, for all of your work and again sharing your wisdom so generously. I personally cannot wait to for the recording of this panel to be up online so I can just revisit it again. It's been so great to learn from all of you. I'm now going to hand us back to the very capable hands of Julie, who will bring us to a close.
Oh, kia ora. Thank you very much, Fenton, and thank you to the team. I just would like to highlight and thank you. I've learned so much from all of these sessions, but also from today, hearing people talking about what they're doing practically on the ground and how they're enabling communities and working alongside communities and highlighting the justice and the traditional governance and cultural practice and grounding their work in people and communities. And I think it's just been wonderful. As I said, we've got one more of these coming up on the 27th, and that is going to be I'm just trying to get my can't do it when I'm talking. Never mind, I'll think about it from my head. That is talking about guys. We've got Ariane Kasman from Papua New Guinea and a number of other speakers. Gosh, I can remember. Talking as well on the 27th. So please watch out for the notice on that one and join in with us. And that'll be the end of our Pacific Environmental series. But after that, we're looking at women leaders across the Pacific and highlighting that what they bring in their importance in the whole of the Pacific. So that said, I'd like to thank very much again everybody today for coming, and I'd like to close with a karakia. I'll close with kia tau because it's the one I feel good about today. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki aihi kuraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me whiwhiwhinga ko tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, amen. Mene, mā te wā, and hope you have a good day. Thank you to all. Bye.